Sound, faint, radio static, slow crackle of a vacuum tube warming. A single Morse pulse flickers through the dark. Narrator soft, distant, like a man remembering. It began as nothing, just static, the sound every operator knew too well. Visual, black and white footage of a dimly lit communications room. Shadows stretch across the walls. Cigarette smoke hangs motionless in the air. But then, between the noise, came a pattern, faint, irregular, but familiar. A call sign that hadn't been heard since the convoy went down 3 years earlier. Sound, slow heartbeat beneath static, almost imperceptible. It was the night of March 3, 1945. The war was turning. The Allies had broken through in the west, and the seas, once ruled by German U-boats, were beginning to breathe again. But inside a cramped coastal radio hut in Cornwall, England, 3 men listened to something that should have been impossible. Visual, flickering lantern light, condensation on the glass. Close-up of trembling fingers adjusting a tuning dial. The signal repeated, then stopped. They looked at each other, unsure whether it was interference or a ghost. The call sign was HX229, the identifier of a North Atlantic convoy lost in 1943, when the Battle of the Atlantic was at its darkest. 38 merchant ships had sailed from New York to Liverpool. Only a handful survived the U-boat ambush that followed, and every man in that convoy had been declared dead. Sound, low, distant thunder of waves. The static merges into the rhythm of the sea. At first, the duty officer dismissed it. Atmospheric bounce. Perhaps ionospheric reflection could bring back fragments from long distances, but this wasn't reflection. The voice that followed was clear, human, and terrified. Visual, slow zoom on the radio speaker grill. The faint glow of instruments bathing the room in ghostly light. The message was short, barely audible. Convoy hit, fire amidships, coordinates, then silence. Sound, the slow turn of a reel recorder, faint crackle of recording tape. They recorded what they could. The static kept returning. Faint Morse bursts over the Atlantic airwaves like a dying heartbeat echoing across time. The Royal Navy Archives would later classify it as anomalous transmission, unconfirmed origin, but the men who heard it that night swore it was real. Visual, a close-up of the handwritten logbook entry, 3:47 hours unknown. Signal, HX229. And when dawn broke, one of them said softly, it sounded like they were still out there. Sound, slow fade to the hum of distant engines beneath crashing waves. The screen darkens, leaving only static. Sound, low hum of storm wind, slow creak of metal. A faint Morse code pulse fades beneath the wind. Narrator measured, reflective. By morning, the report had reached the Royal Navy's communications branch in Plymouth. The entry was logged, copied, and sealed beneath the words, unverified, likely atmospheric. But there was something strange about the recording. The frequency it came from wasn't in use anymore, not since. Convoy HX229 vanished beneath the Atlantic 2 years earlier. Visual, archival footage of convoy ships plowing through rough seas. Oil drums, crates, and tarps lash across decks. Black smoke billows against a gray sky. In March of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic was at its cruelest. German U-boats roamed the sea like wolves, organized into packs, coordinated by Enigma codes and radio silence. HX229 was one of those convoys meant to slip through ships, carrying fuel, food, and lives. The weather was brutal. Ice on the decks, engines freezing. On the night of March 16th, the convoy was ambushed. 11 U-boats closed in. For 2 days the Atlantic turned black with burning oil. 8 ships went down in a single hour. Survivors described the sea as a furnace lit from beneath. Sound, distant explosion muffled by water. Slow roll of thunder blending into sonar pings. When it was over, 38 ships had been attacked. 36 were lost to the depths. The U-boats slipped away before dawn. Rescue ships arrived to find only wreckage, no survivors, no signals, nothing. HX229 was declared destroyed. End of file. Visual, slow pan across wartime typewritten. Document stamped Secret Admiralty Communications 1943, but the tape from 1945 that's faint. Disparate broadcast didn't fit. The coordinates mentioned in the recording pointed to an area far north of the original sinkings when researchers reviewed them decades later. They realized it matched the position of a wreck discovered in the 1980s, a merchant tanker lying upright, untouched. Its hull number, clearly reading HX229 Mercury Star. Sound, deep underwater resonance, metal groaning. The hum of sonar scanning through dark water. Divers found something else. The radio room was intact. The equipment was sealed. Dials still set to the same frequency logged by the Cornwall station. One of the receivers had fused in the transmit position, as if frozen mid. Visual underwater lights reveal a table covered in silt, a rusted microphone still suspended by its cord. No human remains were ever recovered, but on one wall, beneath the grime, divers noticed letters scratched into the paint, rough, uneven, desperate. They read, "Sound." Faint Morse beeps layered under distant waves. Historians debated for decades how that signal could have been heard years after the ship went down. Some claimed it was atmospheric skip, an echo of radio energy trapped in the ionosphere, bouncing across years. Others whispered of something stranger, a ghost transmission, a remnant caught in the magnetic storms that haunted wartime frequencies. But to the men who worked in those rooms, who listened to the endless hiss of static, war had always been haunted. Radios were their only connection to the living world, and their voices often vanished into silence before anyone could answer. Visual, close-up of weary faces in a communications bunker. One soldier staring at the receiver waiting for a voice that never returns. The Royal Navy declassified the file in 1972. The tape preserved in a tin-marked Cornwall transmission, March 1945, still exists. When it was analyzed digitally, decades later, technicians noticed something chilling beneath the noise. Hidden deep in the background static, a faint secondary signal pulsed. Not Morse, not mechanical, a human voice, almost a whisper. The words were hard to decipher, but one sentence emerged clearly. Still waiting for escort. Position unchanged. Sound, slow fade into layered static. Voices overlapping, indistinct, distant, pleading. After that, nothing. The tape ends abruptly mid-hiss, as if the sea itself decided to close the channel. Visual, fade from the glowing radio dial to black ocean waves rolling under moonlight. Some said it was a miracle of physics. Others said it was the sea returning what it had taken. But for those who heard it, men who'd spent years tuned towards frequencies, it wasn't science they remembered. It was a sound of men still out there, calling home. Sound, deep silence. Then a faint signal returns a single Morse dot and dash before fading away. Sound, faint radio hum, like the sea breathing through a wire. Slowly, static drifts into near silence. Narrator soft, mournful, almost whispering. In war, not every message finds its answer. Some remain adrift, lost in the fog between time and memory. The tape from Cornwall was filed, then forgotten, sealed beneath decades of dust. Yet even now, when the wind rises across the Atlantic, radio enthusiasts swear they still catch fragments, bursts of code that fade before translation. Visual archival, film of waves crashing against cliffs. Slow pan to rusted convoy wreckage under gray water. Maybe it was nothing more than interference, a trick of weather and metal. Or maybe, for one impossible night, the dead broke through the static and called across the years to say they were still waiting. Sound, faint, heartbeat blends with soft waves. A single Morse pulse echoes dot, dash, dot. Those who have listened to that recording say it changes something in you. It makes you realize that history never truly ends. It only grows quieter. And somewhere beneath the weight of the Atlantic, in the cold corridors of a sunken convoy, the radios might still hum, waiting for a voice that will never come. Visual, slow fade to black and white still of an empty radio desk. Light flickers, then dies. Sound static fades, replaced by silence. Narrator final line, fading. This was the night Allied radio operators heard a signal from a sunken convoy, and the sea kept their secret for 80 years. Screen fades to black. The faint hiss of static lingers. Then, silence. Visual, grainy footage, like an old film reel restarting for one last flicker. A timestamp appears faintly. 3:47 hours, March 3rd, 1945. The image shakes, then steadies. Sound, soft, real static. Then, impossibly, a faint male voice, distant, broken, seeps through. Unidentified voice, barely audible, filtered through distortion. Still waiting. Signal, do you copy? The screen trembles. The static rises, then collapses into complete silence. A final caption fades in, recording. Archived by the Admiralty Communications Division, Plymouth, Soares, Cornwall, listening station log 45-3, entry, HX229, declassified 1972, sound, slow heartbeat, fading. Then another line appears, stark, simple, haunting. The transmission has never been heard again. Visual dissolved to black. A final whisper of static flutters across the speakers like a last breath. In the years since the war, researchers have found similar anomalies, transmissions thought impossible, bouncing through time from frequencies long extinct. Some say it's a natural phenomenon. Others believe it's memory itself, trapped in the invisible fabric of the world, the echo of those who never came home. Visual faint shimmer of light on water, as if the ocean itself remembers. Narrator final whisper, history forgets what it can't explain. But the airwaves remember everything. Sound, faint wind, carrying a ghostly Morse pulse. 1 dot 1 dash before it fades for the final time.